Call the meeting to order. Consent agenda, previous minutes. There is no discussion. I'll entertain a motion. Have a motion. Sarah made a motion. Elijah.
Hello.
Hi, Elijah. Sarah just approved the minutes from the last meeting. Look for a motion.
I approve. Yep.
What?
Yeah.
I'm at. Okay. Policy, first read, professional learning, students who are unhoused, pupil privacy rights, student surveys. I'll entertain a motion to approve those. If there's any more question of mine. Sarah,
Sorry, I did have a question. So, and some of these, I don't know, you tell me when you take it offline, but so are we automatically just rolling down all of the VSBA model policies?
No,
no.
Okay.
no, we go through it at the policy committee meeting, and the ones that are strongly tied to like legal actions like HHB and Title IX and things like that, because they're so strongly vetted by the lawyers, we take them out of policy for those.
Okay.
And there are others that there are some elements that we've liked better. What we found is that a lot of ours are similar, but when there are changes to the law, we haven't really kept up on some of those pieces. So we've taken them in those situations, but others we do not.
Okay. So I had a couple of questions about two of them, the professional learning and the pupil privacy. I mean, not that we have to go over it today, but I would like to, maybe spend a little bit of time asking a few questions. So
This would be the time to do it before you
Yeah.
approve the.
okay. So on the professional learning one, there is a line here that talks about the professional learning being directly linked to student performance goals. Can you talk a little bit about like what that currently looks like and what those goals are?
So can you tell me where exactly you're talking about? I just want to make sure that I'm at the right context.
So under principles to guide professional development, in that last sentence, it says professional development programs provided by the supervisory union will be directly linked to student performance goals identified in the annual action plan.
So the goals, the performance goals are centered, I don't know why that says student performance goals, because they're really, our professional learning is centered on what the board goals are. So, I mean, it really ultimately is student performance goals. So we're working really hard around getting students to be proficient by the end of grade 3 in literacy. So a lot of the work is centered on that goal, on social emotional learning, and then on student-centered learning practices. So we've tried to make ties, because those are our 3 big priority areas that the board has defined and that we believe in as a system, that we've tried to really make strong connections to that. So we're not going off into other directions. We're trying to keep really centered on those. We do have the way we've structured it. It's not really tied to this, but just so you know, there's some teacher choice in which pathway that they choose. So they have their own goals that they develop at the start of the year, and then they are able to self-select which of those pathways they want to go down, and then select specific directions they want to go under each of those pathways.
Okay, that was my next question. So it's utilizing external resources, or it's internal, or kind of a combination?
It's a combination.
It's a combination, okay. So students can sort of make those choices.
The teachers can.
Right. And so when we're saying it's tied to, let's say, the board goals, are we, is there an approval process, or what does that look like? The menu of options they have to choose from, how do we tie that? Or you, I would assume, or the principal?
So they set goals with their principals at the beginning of the year, and then it's set up with our time that we have at the supervisory union where they can make the choice. If principals wanted teachers to go on certain paths because maybe there are some performance concerns or that seems like a logical direction for them to go in. They can have that conversation with the teachers. We are not at our level, at the SU level, making individual decisions for teachers about those directions.
Right.
There are some that everyone gets, but during the self-selected portion of our professional learning days, they get to choose.
Okay, okay. And then, so there's some type of approval process at the principal level.
It's not really approval, like they, as long as it's tied to their goals. But if there was someone that they wanted to have a deeper conversation with and encourage them to go down another pathway, they have that ability to do that.
Can I just add something to
Yes.
that, maybe for clarification? So the professional learning is developed by the supervisory union. So, you know, it would be a curriculum director, or in this case, directors. And this year, it also included some principals and other people, coaches that were part of that. So when we're talking about choices, we're not talking about like teachers randomly choosing something out of the, you know, the blue. It's strands, for lack of a better word, or areas or the buckets within, that are tied to those goals that teachers get to choose from.
Okay,
So it's all, no matter what they chose, it's all related to our work,
gotcha,
essentially.
gotcha. That's all I had on that. Very interesting. I just wanted some more clarity on that process. And then my other question around this pupil privacy, you know, I kind of read the prior policy in comparison to this one, and this is the one I think I was most focused on. So it looks like this was kind of rolled down from VSBA,
Yes.
but then also based on the PPRA. And so is it pretty similar to what we have been operating under? Even though obviously all of the language is different, seems like it, right?
I don't think that it is incredibly different, but I don't think our policy was up to date with any of the changes that had happened with the law, with the federal law around this. So I think this was vetted through the VSBA and legal counsel. So
Mhm.
we decided to go with their model policy for this one,
Okay,
because there are so many references to federal and state laws or rules.
and so I guess the only question I had here is where it comes to, you know, sort of there's an explanation around the pupil privacy piece of it and then the parents' access piece of it. And so from a parent access perspective, would you classify that sort of as notification? What's being sent out to them annually, or is there some type of a consent for some of, you know, the testing, et cetera?
Do you have a question about like a specific test?
You know, just generally. I think here it's just talking about generally the collection of information, the surveying. So like if you go into that first little paragraph, they're under administrative responsibilities, where it talks about pupil privacy and parent access to information. And then later on in one, it says the right of parents of a student to inspect upon request surveys created by third parties, et cetera, really breaks it down. So I was just wanting clarification on, is there like a notification process for parents, or is it a consent process, either or, both? What that
I
looks like?
think my instinct, I'll ask principals to weigh on this, that it would be more of an opt-out piece. The one that's jumping into my mind would be, by way of example, would be the youth risk behavior survey. And I don't know how, it's been a while since I've done that. I feel like there's a parent letter that goes out for the YRBS. So there's notification, that's the one that I can think of off the top of my head. Can you think of other?
Well, the NAEP testing has,
Yeah.
which happens to fourth grade, which, there's a parent letter going out this week to opt out of the kids taking
But
the
that's not
test.
really a survey.
Right.
That's not really.
So that's not a survey.
But there's that one that we did with Heather Moore,
The Vermont,
Youth Project or
Youth
something.
Project, I believe.
And we
there's
sent
keep
a
it up
letter.
on
I don't think we're doing it anymore, but we sent a letter with that. We usually send a letter
Okay.
and ask them to contact us by a certain date if they don't want them to
If they
participate.
want to opt out of
Yeah.
something.
Those are the only surveys that I could think of, unless anybody else has some.
There might have been others in there.
And there might be something specific to the school, like I know the leader in me, we did something, but families also did it, so. They can do it or not do it.
I think this is more centered on, like, you were doing that for an internal
Yeah,
purpose.
right,
that was
right.
To give
Yep.
information to a
Yep.
third party. So
Yep.
to your point, I think those are the only ones that I can think of that would be third party.
Okay, okay. So, but typically our process is we send out a letter, the parent has the option to opt out.
Yeah.
Based on a letter. Okay, all right. That was helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The professional learning, do you want to go back to that one with, getting that changed to board goals or not keep the student goals? Or through the- This is the first read anyways.
Yeah, we can, if it is a
Okay,
first
got
read,
that.
we can just take that piece back. Just remind me where that was.
First one, P7.
I thought it was about student learning goals, like we set goals for student learning in our buildings. And that's what I thought that meant.
But I do think it links to the board goals.
And then,
Right.
yes, those goals link to the board goals. So
Yeah.
I think it
It's
might,
probably both.
it's
Yeah.
both,
Yeah,
yeah.
Just kick it back to policy and
okay.
figure out from there. Any other questions on the other two?
Don't worry, my ESPN's
Then I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion.
Okay, Sarah's made a motion for accepting the students who are housed in the pupil privacy. Elijah,
Aye. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Rachel? Akula?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. We had none for second read. We had one to be removed. We have to make a motion on that one for the removed.
You should, yeah.
So we have one for removal, which is the HIPAA compliance. Any questions? Okay, entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Sarah's made a motion. Elijah?
Aye. Yep.
Rachel? Cool. Okay. All right. Agenda prioritization, do we need to prioritize anything?
I think we're good with the order that we have.
Okay. Recognition of visitors, we have one. Lisa? Are you a visitor, Lisa?
Yes, I am.
What can we do for you?
Oh, I'm just gonna watch the presentation.
All right, thank you. Thank you
Sure.
for joining us. Anyone else?
Behind, I think they're watching.
No, no, okay. Yeah, right. Okay, brings us to school spotlight. Yes, for elementary. Jen?
Welcome, everybody, tonight. I'm really excited to welcome some of our students and Melissa McKinstry, who is our school librarian. And she has linked with the Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network and has brought that into our classrooms. And so our students are going to share. We have here with us, would you like to say your name, Taylor? What's your name?
Hi, I'm Taylor.
Paige?
Hi, I'm Paige. Hi, I'm Sam.
Hi, I'm Carter.
Hi, I'm Olivia.
Welcome.
And Taylor's going to kick us off. This is a slideshow they helped make about the Vermont Student Anti-Racist Network, and they've been virtually visiting. So Taylor is going to tell us a little bit more about it.
Students Addie and Annika virtually visit our school and read the book, The Youngest Marcher, about civil rights activist Annie Faye Hendricks. They led the class in a discussion about racism and the civil rights movement. We learned that Audrey stood up for what she believed in and the laws changed. Audrey went to jail. She went to jail because she was standing up for what was right and protesting, because sometimes laws are not always right. Because of protesters like Audrey, segregation ended. Yeah. Fourth and fifth graders made their own signs to protest against racism. Black Lives Matter. B is brave. L is leadership. A is artistic. C is calm. K is kind. Next. L is loving. I is independent. V is vibrant. E is empathetic. S is strong. M is modest. A is admiring. T is truthful. T is thoughtful. E is exciting. R is remarkable. Racism. I think racism is when you treat people differently because of their color, race, and sexuality. This is wrong. It does not happen as often than it used to, but it is still a big problem in the community. I am not saying that it's only happening in our community. It is happening other places around the world too. I think this is I really think, and a lot of people think, that this is really wrong. Presented by P.E.G.
VSARN virtually visited and donated 6 free books to EES. VSARN's goal: travel to schools across VT and teach lessons on the following books. To foster kindness and inclusively from a young age for elementary school, and to bring discussions of racism into older classrooms. We also donate the books after. EES School. Students will share these books with our younger students at EES. The Proudest Blue by Ibsha Muhammad.
Share yours first. Okay.
What is racism? Racism is assaulting, or it can be comparing black and white lace. Racism was bad back in the day. Black lace had to sit in the back of the bus and could not drink from the same water fountain. In school, they went to different schools. You could not play with each other because of the color difference. Racism is not just comparing black and white lace. It is also making fun of people that are gay or bi.
EES students think that
You
matter. I want to say you should feel very proud of yourself. You worked so hard on this, and I appreciate your leadership. You did a great job being this.
I just want to say that I appreciated the hair flip during the.
I was thinking the same.
You matter.
During the process, I was cracking up.
I want to thank you for coming. I know it can be a little scary to have to speak in front of all of these grown-ups. You did a fantastic job. And I love that you took the time to reflect what you learned from your virtual student presenters from VSARN. And I also love that your plan is to help others learn about this topic too. So thank you for all of your work on that. Thank you, Ms. McKinstry.
So they learned, and now they're going to share with the other students what they learned. So they're very excited about that to teach others.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You guys.
Good job for staff.
Thank you.
Next is financial budget.
Like this or something?
Oh, yeah.
She also has a advert that works. Are there more? Yeah. Oh, you the counselor? All right, cool. Good night. Thank you again. That's how it goes. No? Yes, yes, indeed, that was something else. It's like, who's on first?
I will pass around hard copies. This did not change from what you saw this morning. Elijah, so you got the most recent version in your email.
Yep.
As well, per copy. So this will be our third time through this slideshow, which we can use for the public meeting in some format. Because it's review for everyone, I'll kind of speed through it. We are here at January 9th, hopefully finalizing a budget tonight. At this point, we don't expect the CLA to change or your pupils to change. We will not know what the yield rate is until May, and so there's no reason other than budgetary decisions to push off the vote. I'll walk you through the warning. These 4 articles will be voted on in person. The first 3 are the same ones we do every year. The 4th one is asking the voters for the authority to elect those first 3 officers by Australian ballot on town meeting day. And what that would do is it would allow you not to have this meeting on this date as an official meeting with your district clerk, with the moderator there, only allowing townspeople to speak. When I dug into this for you, and NMV is doing a similar thing on their side, we were told by the lawyers that we should still do an informational meeting within 10 days of town meeting day. This meeting falls outside of that, so we're gonna have to set another date for this year tonight before you go. In future years, we wouldn't need this mid-February meeting. We would still do an informational meeting. And again, that is one where you're not obliged to have your moderator there, your town clerk there. It's something that you guys could run, with Lynn and I there helping. You wouldn't need a quorum of the board at that. You could do multiple meetings in different towns, different areas. 3 directors' positions are up, 2 in Enosburg and 1 in Richford. I know Sarah's working on signatures. Okay. And then we've got another seat up in Enosburg. I don't know if you want to talk about your conversations on that.
We're gonna need somebody for the one. Elijah, you're not gonna seek election, right?
No, I'm not.
So we will have one school director position open for Enosburg. Will be the 1-year term.
So it'll be whatever term they run for. Initially, you were in the seat that had the 1-year term. At this point, you could go for the 3-year term if you wanted to. And we had a discussion on whether it would be easier to draft someone onto the board if it's only a year commitment and see if they like it. So that may be something that you want to consider.
So if there are people that are interested in running for the board, there is information online about what to do to become a board member. It's under the board drop down. And they can also get a petition from the local town clerks.
Or they can reach out to me and I can email it to them. And most of it will be by ballot. The general objectives, these are the 3 board goals. We've gone over this plenty of times, but we'll have it here for a public meeting. Next is the enrollment. Year-to-date is through 2023, and then their projections after that point. I will say that once we get another year or two away from COVID, I expect that these projections will settle down a little bit as we don't have that blip that you see from 2019 to 2020 where we lost a number of kids. We've gone over these in the past. We'll talk about Act 127 later, ESSER funding expiring, PCB remediation. The health insurance premium increases are now approved by the Department of Financial Regulation. So those are definite. And again, one of the good things in your budget, which is not good in NMV, is that they have 88 eighth graders replacing about 40 seniors. And so a lot more tuition payments going somewhere from that district. Going to recap the staffing changes, and there have been a few tweaks since you last saw this. In Enosburg, a reduction of a 0.2 FTE art teacher, and the change is we basically moved 3 paraeducators from Enosburg Elementary to BT positions, which are paid out of the SU and the special ed budget. So same people paying out of a different pocket, and we move them when they go and get the additional training for the higher skill set. Richford Elementary, I don't believe there are any changes from last month. Again, bringing in the rest of the assistant principal position in from ESSER and title grants, rounding up the art teacher to full-time, an additional paraeducator and a half, and then moving a family engagement coordinator position out of ESSER into the local budget. In Enosburg, no changes from what you saw last. The addition of an art teacher, reduction of a tech assistant position, which we're not refilling. That actually was a position that was shared with Enosburg Elementary. Bringing their French teacher up to full-time, moving a little bit of an interventionist, which is remaining in CFP, into the local budget and making that 1.0. And then one of the FPA advisors currently paid out of ESSER will move partially into the Enosburg High School budget. At Richford High School, bringing in a position that's 3/4 currently in ESSER, and that's the family engagement coordinator. Talked about the reduction in 0.65 of a teacher position based on a lot of incremental movement. And then we had a position that was originally anticipated to be a paraeducator. We have pulled that out and replaced that with it's anticipated as a teaching position. And Lynn or Beth can talk about that if you want. And then in Cold Hollow, moving half of a teacher that you've had in your budget for many, many years. Half has been paid out of the Perkins grant, and we're no longer allowed to do that. And so bringing them into your general fund budget full-time. This is the article that will appear on your warning. It's simpler than in prior years. This is the dollar amount that we're asking for authority to spend. At some point in the next few years, we think that the language around explaining what that is in terms of a per pupil increase will come back. But because of all the changes with Act 127, it's really hard to make a year-over-year comparison this year. And so that was taken out for this year for the next few years. The pie charts that we show you have not changed much. Again, this is just to remind you and show your voters that about 3/4 of what we spend in Enosburg-Richford budget is on people. That next blue swath is primarily the central office assessment, which is your transportation, your food service, and your special educators and those BT positions primarily. the kind of traditional superintendent office, and some technology is out of there as well. And then that green piece right at about midnight there is really the chunk of money that you spend on both supplies and utilities. So most of that is still utilities, which you don't have a lot of control over. We like to bring this in front of the voters because there are still people out there who think if we just buy a few less pencils each year, we're somehow be able to get a couple $1 million out of the budget. And that's not where the money is. This looks at that same budget, but it's split out by function. So about half of what we spend is direct instruction, kind of the traditional teacher in front of kids experience. And then the blue section is primarily student services. You'll see administration is in there at about 9 o'clock. Instructional support would be librarians, technology, professional development for teachers. Student support is largely guidance counselors and nurses. Buildings and grounds, big chunk up at the top. And then your central services again is the primarily the SU assessment. At one point there was a red section, and that's your construction and debt service on construction. And you'll see that that's down to almost nothing. Your big bonds were paid off 2 years ago. The year that we're currently in right now, we're carrying $400,000 for the Sugar House project. In the draft that you have in front of you, that piece has come out as well. And so you're hardly seeing anything in that category. We did the same thing on the SU level for the SU board, and so we're kind of bringing that to the local boards as well. In this slide, what I attempted to do is to take the SU budget, the NMV budget, and then the Enosburg-Richford budget, combine them together, and then take out some of the duplication. So the tuition payments that NMV sends to you every year is a big chunk of that. How we count some of the staff that we then bill back to you, took some of those things out. But just to give an idea overall of where we spend our money if we were a single district. So again, about half of it is direct instruction, going around the clock. Special education is 7%, vocational instruction, teachers and aides program is under 2%. Student support is again guidance and nursing. Instructional support is technology, library, professional development. General administration, that yellow line at 9 o'clock is you and some of the district level insurances that we pay. School administration are really your principal budgets. Central services is your SU budget. Buildings and grounds, the next big kind of teal section, what it costs to run the buildings. And then we've pulled out transportation and food service separately up top. And then again, SU-wide on the next slide. Doing the look at just the SU budget, we were trying to parcel out for the board where those expenses are paid. So starting up at the top with Bakersfield, the first 8 pieces of pie going around from midnight to 3 are what's spent directly at the schools. And so those are special educators. Those are the BT positions. That big yellow chunk is food service, and the big green chunk is transportation. 2 categories that are spent at the school, but we have no way of parceling it out in a logical format. I'll come back to CO in the orange. The top 3 are the Rise and Steps, are the 2 alternative programs that we're building in-house. And then the FPA is the Flexible Pathways Academy. The central office piece would include the typical central office, so superintendent, the business office, HR. It also includes things like your English language learner teachers, who we had a long discussion as SU board members will recall. At the SU board, a number of positions where we could have said We're gonna keep 2 English language teachers at the SU. We're gonna deploy them where the need is, and we're not gonna worry about which district or which school. We decided to go that route rather than saying, Enosburg-Richford's gonna have their EL teacher and NMV's gonna have their EL teacher, and they'll be able to deploy them to 4 or 5 schools in those districts only. It's a fluid population, the needs change during the year, families move from one town or one district to the other. So it made sense to that board to keep it at the SU level. Similar with the coaches, 3 instructional coaches who've been spending most of their time with new hires, since we have a lot of new hires. It's hard year to year to know where those new hires are going to end up in terms of school placement. And it's hard to know within a year which of those new teachers are going to need more support at any given time. So it made sense to keep them there. The other factor that went into that thinking is that those 3 coaches, as an example, can serve all 9 of our schools. If we said we're going to go way back machine to how we ran things 5 years ago and make each school try to hire their own, some schools would be able to hire 1 for full-time, some schools wouldn't get any. And because of that, that rounding up effect, we don't think many people really want a 2-day-a-week job or a 3-day-a-week job. We end up buying more than we need. So
Also in that section is the OTPT.
yeah, some of the very kid rather than very school-specific services. So so that's the thinking behind it, and so that we haven't really teased out everything in that orange piece about what's really going on at 366 Main Street and what's going on in your schools. Act 127 is getting a lot of interest now in the press and among policymakers. So just do a quick walk through that again. In Vermont, there's a requirement in the Constitution for equal access to funding. The way that that's been interpreted, or the way that the legislature has decided to implement that, is through the system of pupil weights, which we've had since Act 60. The school that has higher poverty is going to be able to raise more money for a lower tax rate, or the same amount of money for a lower tax rate than schools that don't have high poverty. And it's a recognition that kids who live in poverty are costlier to educate. Seen that with English language learners, seeing it now with rural schools, small schools. We know they're more expensive to run. Under Act 60, they came up with some weights, but there was no real research behind it. I don't think it was necessarily as simple as back of the napkin. Well, I think this kid costs more than that kid, but there wasn't a lot for them to look at that time. Fast forward 25 years, and Act 127 was developed with a pretty intensive study by UVM to really try to figure out, okay, kid in poverty is expected to cost this much more. Kid who doesn't hear English at home is expected to cost this much more. And Act 127 was really resetting those weighting factors. So they weren't changing the underlying formula. They were just changing sort of who was getting what benefit in terms of different student counts. In theory, advantage districts that are seeing an increase in the number of kids because of Act 127, such as Enosburg-Richford, such as NMV, should be able to raise more money for the same tax rate and then better support those students. That was the intention of the law. They acknowledged that 40% of the districts were disadvantaged as well. And so they gave them this soft landing over 5 years where they wouldn't have to adjust their spending all at once. That soft year landing comes with the price tag. So any district in Vermont that sees their tax rate increase before CLA go up more than 5% is going to be capped at 5%. The money above that cap still is being spent in Vermont somewhere, and so it still needs to come from somewhere. And so Right now, the way that that works is that the yield number, which we care a lot about and worry about when it comes out, it is going to go down the more districts hit that cap. And those of us who are not capped are going to pay the full effect of that. That's something that phases out over 5 years. If it lasts 5 years, there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of interest, I think, in the legislature and in really looking at that and analyzing who is getting those caps and what's the impact on the districts that Act 127 was supposed to benefit. So any questions on that? I know that's a speed read through it, and there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. A lot of quadrants.
So I do have a quick question. When you say that the districts that are disadvantaged are able to raise more money, is that what, when they're raising more money, that's from the state directly? Because clearly it wouldn't come from taxes.
It would come from taxes. So the way the system works, very roughly is we all go out and warn and pass budgets. And then the state looks at it and says, okay, for all these budgets that are passed, we need to come up with this much money because unlike other places where the state would say you get $10,000 per pupil, we tell the state, we just passed the budget for $24 million. We're going to find 5 of it locally. We need the balance. And the state is obligated to come up with that.
Okay.
And so they do that by setting the non-residential tax rate, the residential tax rate. There's some calculation they do on folks who are paying based on income, and then look at those other streams of money that come in, which is meals and rooms tax, and some of those other consumption taxes, lottery that drive it. So once those budgets are passed, the pie is kind of fixed. There's a certain amount of money that needs to be raised. We very roughly, each town has a tax rate that's based on their per pupil spending. So it looks at how much your budget, your voters approved, and also how many of those weighted pupils you have. And so more weighted pupils tends to drive down the tax rate that you would be paying. What happens is that for places whose tax rate is going up, that gets it capped at 5%. When the state did its calculation on the yield, it does that assuming everyone's going to pay what they're supposed to pay. And now they know that, okay, in District X, we're not going to be able to raise $5 million because they're capped. And so they have to adjust the yield and share that $5 million out among everybody who hasn't hit the cap yet.
Gotcha.
So I think the language is problematic here because we have historically been disadvantaged. Our per pupil spending has been at the very bottom of what the state comparisons have been. And the law was written for districts like ours that had historically struggled to invest more per pupil in their communities and have be able to present that to a community and have them support that kind of an increase in spending. So this law was intended to help support, to advantage people or systems like ours. What's happened with this is now that the language terms have shifted. So for years, we've been what we would consider disadvantaged in the previous funding formula. And now we're falling into a bucket of advantaged. And systems who have historically been able to spend, when you'll look, Morgan will show that, I'm sure in a little bit, $20,000 per pupil or whatever the number is, they have been historically advantaged. Now, the way we're talking about that is we're advantaged and they're disadvantaged. And I know the intention behind the law is to just talk about by the additional tax capacity, but the reality is the cushions that they put in place for those systems who've been historically advantaged are going to have an unintended consequence on systems like ours when they hit their tax rate. So that will fall off after 5 years or until there's a patch that the legislature comes up with. But that's one of the problematic pieces of the way this was written. So,
Yeah, and I suspect it'll probably fall off even next year. But right now, we just don't have any real data about how all of the districts in the state with those different impacts, how they're going to budget for it and how their voters are going to react to it.
So just because we're a little less disadvantaged doesn't make us advantaged. But that's what the language is being used that way.
Yes.
we're advantaged
So-
by, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is maybe a borderline simile, but I'm going with it anyway. There's a story on my drive back from Montpelier today about Guantanamo and this group of prisoners there who've been held there now for 20 whatever years, who have been cleared of all charges, and they don't know what to do with them because they can't find any countries that will take them. So it'd be like, they finally get Tuvalu to say, yeah, we'll take this person and take that prisoner out of Gitmo, put them in Tuvalu and say, you are advantaged because you're now free, and not that you're disadvantaged because we've held you with no place to put you for the last 20 years.
It's an interesting.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if I buy that. That might be a little bit.
But I think you get,
Back to the
you get
drawing
the,
board.
you get the point though, is that I just think we need to be careful with the language around this, because I think, this was intended to give us opportunity, which we built into this budget because of the additional long-term weighted average numbers, the number of pupils we gained with this formula. So this is a painful year for a variety of factors that Morgan's going to go over with you, but just remember the visual and what the intention of this law was supposed to do.
And yeah, and I've certainly fielded comments from my colleagues who are in the newly disadvantaged camp, and I don't want to belittle what they're going through because they're having very difficult conversations that do impact their kids. But the flip side of that is that for the last 20 years, we have had a higher tax rate than we should have because of that pupil count. And I tell them, when I do very quick back of the napkin math, I kind of think you all owe us 20 million bucks, and we could spend that on kids tomorrow, and at least help the ones that have, are still in our high schools that have suffered under this unfair.
I'm glad you did clarify that though, because there's pain being felt across the system. And so that's what that 5% cap was about, to allow systems to right size their tax rate without completely taking apart all of the opportunities that they provide students. So it's just intended to make it more equitable across the state. I think it will once we get through these painful years.
So we will be going over this in depth when we get to the handouts, but the FY25 proposed column is the one that we are working on tonight. And so the first line is your spending plan. The second line is your anticipated local revenue. And the difference between those is the education spending. And so that's the number that I send to the state in the spring and say, Governor Scott, we need $18.6 million to run our schools, and they're obliged to come up with it. In terms of the difference, we sort of talked about the positions and the additions to the budget in terms of expenses. On that local grant revenue, most of that increase is due to anticipated tuition from NMV. That's a big move this year. It's I would say abnormally big. It goes up and down each year. NMV has a big 7th grade class as well, so you might get a little bump again next year, depending on how things sugar off. And then that education spending, again, up pretty significantly this year. But that is the number that you need from the state in order to run your schools for FY25. We divided that by the number of kids, which we're now calling long-term weighted ADM. And you'll see from FY24 to FY25, that number almost doubles. And that's really due to, primarily due to the weighting and Enosburg-Richford benefiting from increased weights on a handful of different categories. Spending divided by kids gets you your spending per kid, which is at $10,844. And then if you divide that by the dollar yield, and this figure is the number that we get on December 1st, you get what is the equalized residential school tax rate. And so that's the tax rate that applies to Enosburg and Richford equally before you take into account the CLA. And so with the budget in front of you and all those factors, again, the weighted ADM is probably final at this point. The dollar yield will be set in May, but we're looking at a tax rate that's almost a 3-cent drop over last year. You go to the next slide, I'll have a graph that shows it going down again. And we've seen a general trend downward since FY22. And it would be awesome if that could be the last slide and we could just go home with that. But as you probably all heard, we got bad news on the CLA. And so big movement in every town across the state. Some towns did go up dramatically if they reappraised. Most towns went down in the same percentage increase everywhere. I was at a House committee today and the tax department was asked a lot of questions about the CLA, and it's all tied to an out of control real estate market. Things are flying up. One thing, if you're really paying attention, is that when we warned this budget last year, that FY24 figure for Richford was at about 100%, and they managed to slip a reappraisal in after you warned, but before tax bills went out. And so I'm using the figure that was actually on their tax bill. Sometimes you get lucky and you know about that, and you can, show this big decline that's nothing to do with you, but you just take credit for it. We kind of just missed that window with Richford. And so we can continue on through the slideshow and we'll come back to that, I'm sure. This shows those equalized tax rates compared to the district rate. So again, this black line is the line that you saw before, and that's the tax rate based on everything except for the CLA. You can see in Enosburg, despite that trend, tax rate's been going steadily up and much more dramatically in the last 2 years. Again, completely due to the CLA, completely due to the hot real estate market. Richford's looks a little weirder because between FY23 and 24, they reappraised. So that tax rate for them gets to drop. And then it's bumped back up on FY25. And I'll pause here and say that the purpose of reappraisals, because there are a lot of people who are not understanding this and putting out bad information. If Courtney and I are both in a $200,000 house, according to the grand list, and she's in Richford and I'm in Enosburg, what the CLA is attempting to do is to say, yeah, Courtney, your real estate's doing this in Richford, so we think your house is actually worth $220,000. Doing this in Enosburg, Morgan, so we think your house is really worth $180,000. Because Vermont doesn't apply the CLA to individual assessments, it does it indirectly through the tax rate. And so instead of it giving me the same tax rate on $180,000, it's going to give me a little lower tax rate on my $200,000 than Courtney has. When you reappraise, there are towns where that CLA has dropped from or risen from maybe 70 to 120, 130, gone significantly other direction. Their tax rate's going lower, but what that means is that the house that they thought was worth $200,000 last year is now worth $400,000 on paper. And so the same amount of money in general is going to be raised. And so we've got people going around saying it's, unfair to these towns that have a low CLA versus these towns that now have a high CLA because they were appraised. And, that messaging may work right up until June 30th when people get their tax bills and they're like, oh yeah, that lower tax rate isn't doing much for me when my house is worth twice as much.
I think that you had a nugget in there. Can we just go back for 1 second?
The last slide.
Yeah. So the black is the piece that shows, as Morgan said, what the tax rate is pre-CLA, and that's equal. That's where it is just based on ed spending, so it's exactly the same for each of the communities. You said in Vermont, we don't apply that at the individual property level. We do it through this. I think my executive director for Vermont superintendents would talk about this as being a legacy factor in our education funding system. So to have a factor like this that remains in the education funding system that could have a school system that is seeing a decline in that tax rate pre-CLA, see such wild swings because of the CLA doesn't make sense. The CLA isn't being driven by anything that's happening in schools. It's completely being driven by property values and what homes are selling for in our communities. So I'll just say, I don't think it's logical for it to remain in our funding system. And I do hope that the legislators will consider removing this from the funding system and finding a mechanism by which to apply the CLA at each individual tax bill rather than having it, because it's so confusing. The funding system in Vermont is incredibly confusing. So people are going to look at the bottom line and say, look what's happening with our spending in our schools. But the reality is that we have seen the decline even while being able to have the benefit of some of the additional tax capacity on any additional opportunities on those long-term weighted average. So it's hard to communicate about, and it would function. I think it would be much more logical to have it be attached to the bill so people can understand it's just related to their property value, not about school spending. That's my 2 cents. Which I might have to give.
Too logical to work.
Yeah.
This was your treasurer.
So this chart you see every year. If you start from the bottom at the lowest spending district at about 8,000 per pupil, and you go up, the first dark blue line is Northern Mountain Valley, and then the next dark blue line is Enosburg-Richford. So it shows you where you are in relation to the state, and that 8,000 to, I think it's 14,000, 18,000 range in terms of per pupil spending. The red lines scattered throughout are the other districts in Franklin County, just to see how you compare to your county peers. That lower black line is the Franklin County average, and then the black line right roughly in the middle is the statewide average. So just to show you kind of where you are in comparison to the rest of the state. And this is for the budgets that we are living with this year. So we won't have, obviously, next year's information until budgets are finalized and passed. I would anticipate that we are not going to go flying up this chart in the next year, based on what I'm hearing from folks across the state. This article, as it always does, will appear in your meeting. This gives you official authority to borrow money in the summer and early fall before you start seeing taxes come in from the towns or from the state. This is an article that we've put on for the last few years, asking the voters to take half of the unspent fund balance from the prior year and put it into a capital reserve fund. I am showing in the document going around that we would do this again and do it again at half of what we anticipate is going to be left over. NMV did not put any in this year, but they were in starting from a less rosy place than you were in terms of their budget.
They had to pay the 1 million and you get
Because
to
they gave you
receive the
$1
1
million.
million.
They didn't have to before. And then these are your town meeting day polling locations, where people will be voting on your budget and on your school board seats. You can pull up the one-pager PDF. So any questions on that, anything on that presentation before we dig into the details? And if people think of other other facts or other topics that you would want addressed in that for the public meeting, should we get anybody showing up this year? Happy to put those in there.
Morgan, I just want to thank you for doing all this and being in charge of this. It's so reassuring knowing that your depth of knowledge and all that you're doing. I can safely say you're genius.
I hope it's not a completely false reassurance. So we will work on the work off the one pager that's in front of you now, and principals, you all got it by email today as well. So in the FY25 proposed column, this just breaks down the budget as a whole into kind of more manageable chunks. And so some things that I want to call out to you on the first two lines, direct instruction and special education. The special education on this line is only the special education that you're paying for out of your local budget. So this would be paraeducators who are working with kids on APs. Special ed assessment comes later on in the budget. And the reason that there is such a significant decrease in special ed and a commensurate increase in direct instruction is not because there are fewer services being provided, not because there are fewer kids in need, but because the way that we track special ed expenses in Vermont really only has some pretty limited purposes. And there's a pretty high bar for tracking them. So you have to attest that, the people that we think are working in gen school, paraeducator X is only seeing kids who are working on IPs. And we ask Jen to attest to that since we're not in the building. And with Act 173, we don't need to do that in order to increase our reimbursement, which is how the old model worked. You spend $1 million in special ed, the state would send you back $500,000. Now the state is telling you up front, this is the money that you're getting for special ed, and they want to track it, but they don't need to track it to that same level of detail. So we're really trying to kind of reduce burden on the schools and recognize the flexibility that some of the principals use in terms of those staff who we may think are only doing special ed work. So it's a long way of saying those first two lines and the change in the first two lines, you can really combine the two of them together and not worry about the split between the two. Vocational instruction, athletics, co-curricular, adult ed, all pretty self-explanatory and no major changes there. Trying to track things like athletics and co-curricular better and separately, more so than we've done in the past. And then we've also in the direct instruction, insignificant, maybe in a $24 million budget, but we have budgeted for principals to have more opportunities to take their kids on things like field trips, because coming out of decades of budgeting in an austerity mode, we're kind of looking for ways to open things up there and equalize the opportunity between ER and other districts. Is Act 127 intended? Second section, support services. So again, student support is largely guidance and nursing, instructional support, library, technology, professional development. General administration is the school board, as well as some district level insurances that we pay, legal fees, things like that. School administration are largely your principal budgets. Central services is the assessment that goes to the supervisory union. So again, probably the second largest increase is in that line. For those of you who are not on the SU board, transportation was a big increase there. Food service was a big increase there. And then bringing in some of those positions from ESSER, such as the 3 coaches, and then adding in EL teacher, a second EL teacher. Buildings and grounds up a little more than normal. And what I have done in this budget, and you'll see it scattered throughout, is to just put some amount in for each of the buildings for larger ongoing maintenance type projects. We know we have them in this district and these 2 districts when they were separate. We sort of waited and hoped for a year when we took in more tuition money than we budgeted, and we would use that to fix up our buildings. Trying to institutionalize an understanding that these buildings are old and they take money to maintain, and we're gonna do that more consciously. I don't think I have any in this budget for Cold Hollow. Obviously, if the boiler goes, we're gonna fix it, but we've got this big project on the books, and we know that we're gonna be putting a lot into that rather than into the general fund budget. See down that facilities acquisition construction line, that drop of $400,000 is the sugar house coming out, and hopefully we're spending all that 400,000 in this calendar year, or sorry, this school year. And then lastly, debt service, and you'll see in that very first column, FY23 actual, that was your last big bond payment. And that has gone away, and we'll at least enjoy another year or so before we have a bond payment again. Getting down to the revenue, the local revenue is primarily tuition for both the 2 high schools and Cold Hollow. So you'll see that number is up, both because I'm anticipating your tuition rate's going to be higher, but also we have a lot more kids that we're expecting to show up in September. The other revenues really didn't change too much. State revenue is primarily money that the tech center brings in through different grant programs that support vocational education. Your federal revenue is for the ROTC program. And then that other revenue line, that increase there is what it would look like if you did put half of your fund balance into the capital reserve and you put the other half, that 207,481, into buying down the tax rate in this budget. And then the last section just walks through the tax rate calculation again. We went over this on the slides, and I've sort of grayed out 3 of the comparisons because we've changed the way that that we count kids. You can't really make a logical year-on-year comparison there. And then that follows down through, at least as far as the dollar yield. So I'll pause there for questions. We do have the 30-page backup to this, and I can go into detailed questions on that. I'm certainly not going to walk you through that. And then I would just remind you again that that if you feel the need to impact the budget significantly on your district, it's people and tuition projections or revenue projections. I think I'm assuming you're going to get 60% of the NNV kids, which is historically pretty accurate. In years past, we have strayed from that and felt like we were going to get more, or we were going to get fewer, and it was usually to address a specific tax rate concern. In a year when the CLA wasn't moving, I would look at 3 cents down and say, we're all going home and beating the storm. But I understand that, that takes some messaging to get people to look at that.
Morgan, if I was listening correctly, you said that, in the last line of the green section, other revenue, $207,481 is half of the carryover.
Half of the carryover.
And so how much does that affect the tax rate? How much does it take to affect the tax rate by a penny?
163,000.
Okay.
So it's a little more than a penny. It buys it down.
I want to make a suggestion that people might agree with or not agree with. I wonder if it would be helpful, I really like the chart you had where you had the black for ER and then you had green for Enosburg and red for Richford. I wonder if you attach numbers to those dots, that if people could, because the tax rate, like in Richford, went down significantly, and it's going up, but not as high as what it was in 23.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very helpful slide.
And I think that it's important to note that Richford residents had a tax rate that was 86 cents last year because that reappraisal came in right under the wire. So you're able to have that benefit. So it's still, you're talking about, is it $1.05, $1.06?
Yeah, it just looks like a dramatic increase. But if you're comparing it to 2 years ago, it's still a decrease.
Yeah. 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So you think calling out the actual tax rate on those dots would help?
I wonder.
Do you think we would have to go all the way back? Because that could get busy, or if we just focus on 24 and 25?
That's what I'm wondering. Or 23, 24, 25.
Or maybe 22, 23, 24, 25, kind of give it a little historical.
Or on a separate sheet of paper.
I mean,
or on a separate slide, not a sheet of paper.
He does have it. It's
Right.
It's on the y-axis, but I see what you're saying about there's something visually when you see that.
Yes.
That is a little visceral.
Yes, it is there on the axis, but I'm not sure that, or in a chart, maybe you just want a chart or a table where people can see in the table, this was your tax rate in Enosburg for these years. These were your tax
Well,
rates.
and also, I mean, I think what they're gonna wanna see is how much they're gonna be paying. So is there a way to do an analogy between what a tax rate was last year on a $200,000 house, and then if their house is now worth $250 with a lower tax rate, what that equals? You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. I don't know that we can go forward and say the $200,000 house is now worth 300, because some of them are worth $500,000 and some of them are worth.
Right, I'm just wondering if you could do a few comparisons that are enlightening.
We used to put out, just for the current year, if your house is this much, this is what your tax rate would be. If your house is this much, this is what your tax rate would be.
That way people could do some math and be like, okay, it's not going up.
Then income sensitivity, do those tend to stay more constant, or are those also going to link this coming year?
They will increase as taxes increase, but not as much, I think is probably the easiest way to say it.
So the majority of the people, I don't remember what the percentage is here, but it's high in our communities, will see the benefit of the income sensitivity. So even though this looks like it's increasing significantly, most people will not feel that full impact because they'll get the benefit of
Right,
that.
so if I pay based on income, I still care if we warn a $1.10 tax rate versus a $2.10 tax rate. It's a $2.10 tax rate, I am gonna pay more. I'm not gonna pay as much more as someone who doesn't have that protection.
You know how you send a flyer out to all of the residents? Can that slide me on the,
Possibly.
I think that's the most powerful slide.
You think that's better than the ones showing us at the bottom?
Yeah,
of the
I don't
state?
think they care. I think that's what they care about.
I agree with you.
I think there's power in the other one too.
I do too.
In there, like the other ones.
But maybe you can put both, I think that one's more powerful to many people.
True.
Well, because you actually can see it, but I do think the other one, I think people need to know that.
Yeah.
So
I
we
live in
talk about
Fletcher,
us.
which is always pretty low, Fletcher too.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, other people must have it much more challenging.
But, yeah.
It's hard to look at that
They're
and
more
be called an advantage district.
Gosh darn
We
it.
could put it in the annual report too. This website.
So can I just ask one question?
Mhm.
And I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure I understand. So they set the yield, which is almost an imaginary number in December, but the yield that is actually finalized in June may be higher or lower than the yield that was set in December. So all of this is proposed, but.
Conjecture.
Right.
Preliminary. So the yield when it's set in
That's what I-
December is based on, they are, learned today, they are looking at projected CLA, so they kind of know where the CLAs are gonna end. They come to us, the agency comes to us in November and says, okay, how much are your budgets going up? And so I'm telling them, not having met with you once yet, not really knowing where health insurance is going. A lot of years we don't know where staffing's going. So I'm coming up with some pretty rough guesses, as I'm sure everybody in the state is. And they're taking that to project the yield. The yield comes out and we all either say, wow, the yield's a lot better than we thought. We can add stuff to this budget, or well, we got some problems coming down the road, and then everybody comes in lower. And so it does tend to have to correct for that. The other thing is that the tax commissioner has to set the homestead yield, the non-homestead rate, and the income sensitivity yield, and doesn't have a lot of flexibility in how he does that. When the legislature gets it, they can say, non-homestead people have had a good ride for the last few years. Let's make them pay more, and let's make resident taxpayers pay less. Or, incomes are up everywhere. We don't have to give as much in income sensitivity. We're going to give it to this group or that group. So they're not restricted to treat those three categories as even. They can also, in a year like this, say, well, those tax caps of 5%, let's say they cost $20 million across the state. We could say we're going to pull $20 million of revenue from somewhere else and put that in the ed fund. I think that's unlikely, but they do have that, and that would drive down yields.
So it's a lot of moving parts when you get to this point in the budget process. Because it's proposed, there's uncertainty. This year, it's just because we've shifted the way this all works this year, there's a lot more uncertainty because we don't know some pieces that will come, if there's anything that'll be done this year related to this. And, Beth said we don't know what the yield will end up being, but that piece at least is something we're used to not knowing.
And there's frequently talk about, well, would it be better if we warned our budgets later on in the year? And because of the way that the system works, it's very circular. So they can't set the yield until they know what budgets have passed. And we say, well, we can't pass budgets until we know what the yield is. But really, they need to know how much they're going to be sending us next year before they can figure out how they're going to raise it.
Anything else? You just.
I don't know. I would love to leave this meeting with a warned budget. If you are okay with what you're seeing, I'll also ask you for some motions to set an allowable tuition rate And with this draft, I think those figures should be 16,000 for the tech center, 19,750 for the 2 high schools, and 17,000 for the elementary school. The elementary grades we've never used. In theory, a town that doesn't operate a school might send a kid to Enosburg Elementary as a tuition kid, but there's none around us. The tech center and the high school obviously do matter, and that's the first billing that we send out to the other towns. I also sent out a copy of the warning. If anyone's found any errors in that, I would love to know about it. Other than that, I would plug in the dollar amount for the budget and the dollar amount for the capital reserve. And then before we leave tonight, I would want a time and a place set for that informational meeting. So we'll include that on the line.
Okay, so what are you looking for motion right now? For the first one?
If you're okay with the budget, what I'm looking for is a motion to award an FY 25 Enosburg-Richford Unified Union School District budget of $24,545,419.
Any discussion on that? Sure. All right, if there's no discussion, I need a motion to warn an FY 25 Enosburg-Richford Unified Union School District budget of $24,545,419. Have a motion? Sarah made the motion. Elijah?
I approve.
I'm an aye.
The second would be a motion to announce an FY 25 elementary tuition rate of 17,000.
Okay. I need a motion to announce an FY 25 elementary tuition rate of 17,000. Have a motion?
Make motion.
Sarah made a motion. Elijah?
Aye.
Rachel?
Aye.
And I'm an aye.
Third would be a motion to announce an FY 25 secondary tuition rate of $19,750.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, who has made the motion? Elijah?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Rachel? And I'm an aye.
Fourth would be a motion to announce an FY 25 vocational tuition rate of 16,000.
Do I have a motion? Rachel made the motion. Elijah?
I approve.
Aye.
And Sarah?
Aye.
And I'm an aye.
And then the last one would be a motion to approve and sign the Enosburg-Richford Unified Union School District 2024 annual meeting warning. And then we can, under board business, we can set that last date, and then we'll just print that out and have you sign it before we leave it.
I'll make that motion.
Who has made the motion? Elijah?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm an aye.
And that's all I have.
Morgan, how are the tuition rates determined?
I have a spreadsheet, and we take the total costs. There are some things that we have to back out by law, and there's some revenue that we have to back out by law, and then I make a guess at how many kids are going to show up next year and divide that way. If we're off, this board and NMV have an agreement that we will true up to the dollar. For other districts, which we don't have too many kids that are coming from other than NMV now, but we there's a formula the state has set to true that up, so that if you're within 3% of what you've announced, you don't get any money, and if you're over 10% of what you announced, you don't get beyond 10%, but you can go back and get that within that band.
Do students who do high school choice, like an NVU kid who comes, no?
No, so that's a separate scheme. We get to educate them and not count them.
But if we send a kid out of district, the money stays here.
I see.
Act
Goes both ways.
129, the money does not follow the kid.
Anything else?
That's all I got.
Okay, Lynn?
Okay, I have quite a few items, but I think most of them are going to be quick for you. So under personnel. Okay, I'm jumping right in because I'm now on my computer. So under personnel, we have one professional position that we would like to have the board make a motion on, and that is Clifford Luce. We have a high school science teacher position that has just opened at Enosburg, and we'll get to that in resignations. I would like the board to approve hiring Clifford Luce to fill that high school science teacher position.
Have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Sarah made a motion. Elijah?
I approve.
I approve.
So informational, it says action, Jonah Frankie is the high school science teacher at Enosburg High School, and he's breaking contract effective the end of this week. So the board does not need to take action because it is a contract break. So informational around openings at Enosburg Elementary School, we're looking for a bus monitor, a math interventionist. Enosburg Middle and Enosburg High School are looking for school counselors. Richford Elementary is looking for a school counselor, a school social worker, school-based clinician, a math and literacy interventionist, and a paraeducator. Richford High School is looking for paraeducators. We do have one other action item, and I think this, I don't remember if this was on in your board packet or not, but Liz Erickson, who is a longtime teacher at Richford High School, is a member of the Navy Reserves, and she has some duty obligations coming up. So she's asking for 11 unpaid leave days to be able to fulfill her Navy duty requirements. So if you could make a motion to approve that unpaid leave, approve your request.
Do I have a
Make a
motion?
motion.
Rachel made a motion. Elijah?
I approve.
Aye.
I'm an aye.
Okay. Every year at this time, I bring you this question as a board, and it's called the contemplation of a reduction in force. So we don't know what's going to happen with the budget. We know that what we've proposed in the budget, but we've often, we have to let the union know at this time of the year whether or not we're going to contemplate any sort of reduction to the teacher workforce. So that isn't that we are going to make cuts, it's just opening the door that should we need to, if there's a problem with getting the budget approved, that we're notifying you that could happen. Last year, we had this conversation, and based on where we were at that time last year, all the boards in FNESU made the decision not to send the notice given the staffing shortage that we had been contending with. We're in a little bit of a different situation now. We just had our meeting with NMV last week, and we talked through this. There is the reality of conversations that are happening around school spending and impacts of CLA and shifts with 127 in messaging around there. Feels a little more volatile than it has in several years. So if you do not send this letter to the union, you cannot later say that you're going to reduce your workforce. So the question I have for you is, do you want me to send the letter as a just in case? And just informationally that NMV voted to have me send the letter this year because the circumstances to them felt different.
Any questions on that? I say we send it.
Yeah.
Okay. You need a motion on that?
Yes, please.
Okay. You need a motion.
Make the motion.
Sarah made a motion. Elijah?
Aye.
Rachel?
Aye.
I'm an aye.
Next up, I have a executive session conversation about our teacher retention strategic plan. So I'm going to ask more, maybe we could do that at the very end.
Sure.
We can let principals go a little early. Nothing under student except some fabulous pictures of things that are going on in in all of our ER schools.
Preview of annual reports.
Oh, yes. So those pictures will be in there. I'm gonna give you a really quick update on our support staff negotiations. We start tomorrow night with our support staff. We'll have another session, I think it's January 22nd is our second session, 22nd or 24th, somewhere in that week, the 22nd. And then we have a third just in case session that is scheduled for after the February break, so sometime in early March. So we don't have anything to report other than those dates, but I'll update you at the next board meeting about any progress we have made. You're going to see PCB update in most of our future agendas because it's a pretty important thing that's happened. We're still in a holding pattern. We're good at Richford Elementary School. We're mostly good at EES. We have to do some retesting in one space. There's no change in anything. Nothing was above the elevated levels. Everything was below. But we're still going to retest in one space there for the rest of the year quarterly. They've done the assessment, the last I knew, at Cold Hollow, but we have not done the testing yet, correct?
No, they tested.
They have tested, so we're waiting on get confused with the number of schools and where we are. So they have tested there, we're waiting on the results at Cold Hollow. They have not tested in either of the two high schools.
But they have done the assessment.
Okay, when did they do that?
I think November,
Okay.
October, November. They said they would be back in January, February to test.
Their timelines have not been predictable.
No.
So we're nowhere near what the original timeline was for when they were going to do the assessments or the testing. And has anybody showed up to do yours?
Not that I know of. Yeah. And we, on the original calendar, I think we were last.
I think you were
I was
in
thinking
25.
One of the
almost.
newest.
Yeah.
Yeah, 25, I think it was.
So that's where we are with PCBs. Hopefully we'll come back and tell you after we get these results, it's all good. On the other side, we've got two schools that didn't have to be tested because they were built recently enough, and two schools that did have to be tested, and both have PCBs that we're contending with. So both Berkshire and Children. Legislative session update, it began January 3rd. They have returned to Montpelier, and I think it could be described as a frenzy. There's been a lot already happening during the legislative session. Obviously, education funding has been a really hot topic, along with several other things. So important for you to all understand the legislator contact information. So as school leaders and as board members, you have the right to advocate for things that you see coming through the legislature. You can't advocate as a group individually, but you can advocate as an individual individually. So you will receive VSBA legislative updates. So you should see those. I believe they come out nearly monthly, sometimes a little more frequently during the legislative session. And I think it's important for you as board members and also for you as school leaders, you get those from the BPA, to read those. It gives you really good information about what some of the things are. There are some things that they really highlight the education-related topics that are happening in Montpelier. And there are a lot of things already that people are talking about related to education. So pay attention to those things, and I'll try to bring you updates as they're coming. I think right now, there are some bills that are being put together that we're aware of. I think that there's some work that's happening around discussions around laws that passed in previous years, like education funding, and trying to figure out how that's working. And then there's always reports on previous legislative actions that go on in Montpelier. Anything you want to add, Morgan? So I always put this on my January meeting. Is there anything that we need to do or talk about in terms of annual meeting prep? I know that we do need a date, and I don't know if we got that yet, but we have our formal annual meeting that is February
22nd.
22nd, and where, can you just say where it is and what time?
7 o'clock, at Enosburg High School this year.
Okay. And then,
You know, we were at Enosburg last year.
It says Richford on the, it says
We
Richford
were
on
in
the date.
Enosburg last year.
School?
On the
Oh, we were.
central office calendar.
Morgan, do you want them to choose what night for the informational meeting?
Yes, please. And it needs to be after the 24th, which is a Saturday, so the week of the 26th. And MV is,
27.
That's vacation, right?
Yeah.
again, this is one where we don't need a quorum.
Oh,
We don't anticipate a huge turnout.
And isn't that we can have that like wherever? No, we don't have to do this.
Correct. Can be anywhere, it can be anywhere, in one of the two towns, but.
So what day did you say NMV landed on? I don't think it's landed on my calendar yet.
I'm gonna use the 27th, it's on your calendar.
Ah, there it is. Skipped over that day. So 26, 28, 29,
26. If that works for everybody.
the Monday.
Yeah, Monday. Is that good for you? That's not good for you, right?
That's during winter break, right? You said that you don't need a quorum for that?
No.
There's no way for us to avoid that. That's why we put the annual meetings where we did to try to avoid that winter break, but we can't because we have to be within 10 days.
But we don't need a quorum, right?
Two of us.
So February 26th, same 7 o'clock.
So, is that Richford or Enosburg?
Up to you. This one,
Or that
is
last year.
just correct. Well, we'll be in Richford the week before.
So the annual meetings in Richford and the
Yeah.
informational meeting will be in Enosburg.
Makes sense.
Right.
It's too often.
Did we do both last year?
No.
We have not done an informational meeting in the past. That's something that we've now been advised we should be doing.
Because our annual meeting is more than 10 days before the vote, and we have to have a meeting within 10 days of the vote.
Just because what everybody wants to do is go to more meetings.
Good break.
Sorry.
Morgan's rubbing off on me.
Okay, so
Somewhere warmer.
you'll have an informational meeting February 26th, 7 PM at Enosburg High School Auditorium, Library.
I mean, we
Probably
had
have it in
one
Matt's
person.
office and we'll be in
I mean, yeah. It's a library.
Yeah, it could fit 10.
auditorium.
Okay.
We should warn it.
So I'm gonna jump in. This should be really quick, but I found it to be interesting. One of your board goals is around social emotional learning, and our attendance policy calls for me to report out to you on attendance. And I think that's connected to some of the social emotional learning data that we have been looking at. So I'm gonna show you some graphs, and I don't know, Courtney, if you're gonna be able to get them big enough for them to really see, but in our new student data management system, I'm gonna talk about what this is, so it's okay if you can't make it bigger. I'm able to pull in comparison data, and I pulled it in a variety of different ways. So from left to right, you have Richford High School, Enosburg Falls High School, Richford Junior High School, Richford Elementary. Oh boy,
Guessing
now
that's
I can't see it. Now I think it's Enosburg Middle and then Enosburg Elementary School. So what you see is on the blue line, those are students who are there full day. The orange line are reported in the student information system, and they're there at least part of the day, okay? So you can see the data, that's by school. And the next slide, Courtney. This is by grade level. As you can see, take a little dip when we get into the older grade levels. I do wonder, I wondered when I was looking at that data, some of that is based on like, you know, do they do attendance if they're out doing co-op? So they're counted as present if they're, okay.
Or a field trip or.
Right.
We also have, by senior year in particular, we have kids who actually don't have a full day
Right.
in school. Sometimes they have a job they go
Right,
to.
Right. They're learning with flexible pathways, right? Okay, the next one is by day of the week, which is also interesting data. And then the next is by ethnicity, and these were similar between the two schools. So from the left to the right, Pacific Islanders, American Indian, declined to specify, Caucasian, multiracial, African American, not specified. Courtney, can you say the distinction between the two?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to remember what I said last week. Decline to specify if there is an actual button that you click. You don't want to say what you are. Not specified means that the person didn't pick anything. They just left that section blank.
Then the next, second from the right is Hispanic, and furthest to the right is Asian. It's interesting to look at those patterns. Then I looked at a comparison of gender, and left is male, right is female. So you have slightly better attendance rates with your girls than you do with your boys. So it was the first time that I've pulled the data this way, so we'll be able to look at it over time as we start, you know, really digging into data this way. And so if there are questions that come up after you're looking at this, just reach out. And it's the first time the principals are actually seeing data this way, because the EduClimber is relatively new to us, and now this is our first year where all of the data is really populated in there, and we can pull this out from the link between PowerSchool and our EduClimber system. So I'll bring this back to you another time later in the spring. We'll look at it again. This next portion, each year in the January meeting, we need to set some limits around 129. Act 129 is related to universal high school choice. So just to give you a little context, if you live in a community that does not operate a high school, you have choice. So all of our NMV students have choice. They can go to any high school they want in the state. The way the law was written is that if you live in a community that offers a high school, you do not have choice. You've historically had to attend the high school in the town in which you live. There was a law passed in Vermont quite some time ago that allows for universal high school choice for those students who don't traditionally have choice. So the law is very specific. It's bound by deadlines and process and procedures that need to happen between the school of origin and the school the student is trying to apply to go to. So each year, this board needs to make a decision around the allowable students that are able to transfer out of each high school and the number of students who are allowed to transfer in. It took us some time to figure this out because it's so complicated, but the minimum limit is not fewer than 5% of resident students or 10, whichever is less. And that's related to the number of students allowed to transfer out of each high school. So the minimum can be not fewer than 5% or 10, whichever is less. The maximum limit is not more than 10% of resident students or 40, whichever is less. So the board set this limit last year, and it was similar to what they had set in previous years. The 23-24 limits were that there was a limit of 7 students who could transfer out of either of the high schools, and 20 students, five per year, transferring into each high school annually. I pulled the data from the 2 registrars, and we're not near either of those thresholds, so they don't recommend that you make any change to those numbers, but you will need to make a motion to approve them if that's what you wish to do.
Any questions on that? I'll entertain a motion. Rich made a motion. Elijah?
I approve.
Aye.
Sir?
Aye.
I'm an aye.
And that's all I have for you, except that executive session that you can come back to.
Your principal's report. Kelly?
Everything is informational.
Beth?
Everything's informational, but I just want to say that we had something fun. I'm sometimes fun challenged and I need help with fun. And Sharon Rotuno is a para in my building and she is great with fun. And so she organized a school-wide rock, paper, scissors tournament on the day before break. And it was with Mardi Gras beads. And the kids really, the staff got into it. It was a lot of fun. So I just wanted to do a shout out for Sharon for bringing a little fun into our world.
They won the Mardi Gras beads for winning their rotation.
Right. So, and if somebody challenged you, you couldn't back down from the challenge. But once you were, everybody got a string of beads when you walked in the building.
Oh, wow.
And then once they were gone. So if I challenged Lynn and I won, I would take her beads and she'd be done. And so a sixth grader, Ava McKay, won the whole tournament.
That's awesome. I love the hot cocoa bar too. The hot cocoa bar, I thought was awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great.
It's fun.
Jen? Moving on to Jen.
Just information.
Okay. Matt?
One piece, so the snack shack that's out by, towards the athletic fields, the foundation is in really bad shape. And we got an estimate on replacing the foundation, that involved digging around it, building it, and pretty much rebuilding for exactly what we have in place right now for $40,000. It's a chunk of money. So, you know, before we have a sense of how we'd like to proceed, it'd be good to hear, what folks are thinking. Yeah, because as Lynn explained to me before I was here, the board made a commitment to building that.
Cold Hollow students actually built that. They
Not the foundation.
They put it on.
Not the existing.
Yeah, they put it on existing foundation from a trailer that was removed
Right.
from that property. So it's sides are chipping in, so it needs to be addressed. And it was a sizable investment when we had it built, so it's definitely something I'm assuming the board wants to protect in terms of the investment in that building. So I think just give us a direction. You don't have to say like, you know, spend this amount of money, but are you wanting us to proceed with trying to find solutions and bring them back to you?
I think so, yes. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Keep going that way.
So we can look at, you know, what somebody else said, well, what if we filled that in, poured a slab, moved, you know, some of the utilities, so we could work on getting some estimates. Yeah, because some of the damage that you see on the outside of it or in the floors is because that foundation isn't supporting it so well, and so it probably looks in a lot worse shape than it would be if the foundation were aligned properly.
And my understanding is they use that for restrooms too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Anything else?
That's all, thank you.
Nate?
Sugar house updates out to bid, so we should be getting those in by the 22nd. Nothing new yet on the other building project, except that they have a couple of questions around some of the things you've talked about before. Whether a childcare center is gonna be at the Monteith House. So they just, you know, before they get too far and they're planning, they wanna know if it's gonna be an option. And then the adjacent property, whether that's something that we wanna purchase or not. Doesn't have anything to do with the building project. But that's something that the board will have to think about whether they want to pursue that route. I'm 50-50 on it. It's, I timed it's about a 90-second savings on the walkover with, currently it'd be better visually, but if the front of the building then becomes on the other side, that'd be the back of the building, so we would lose the visual. So, I mean, I don't see a major benefit of that for that property itself.
You go back and say more. What's the question about the Monteith House?
There was some talk about that being transformed or torn down in the childcare.
Yeah, so I think the board, the way, and correct me if I'm wrong, or the board wants the architect to look at that
Yes.
and to bring back numbers related to
Okay.
to doing that. So there, I don't think there's a question necessarily on the intention of what they want from the architect. The question will be when they look at the project as a whole.
Right. With Bryce.
Can you relay that information, Morgan?
Mhm.
Thank you. And hopefully those bids in a couple weeks come in where we want them to, and we can get that done and the money allocated timely.
So one of the things I think that it's important for us to think about as we're moving forward in this process, this is something that we've done in other schools when they're starting to undertake a project like this. There are two pieces. You've got the Sugar House project, and then you've got the potential proposed construction project. I think it makes sense for us to have board representation on both of those teams as we move forward, and that's a conversation Morton and I had during our pre-meet, just so that you've got a board member who is there and is a part of that. So I don't know how you want to handle that piece.
Do you have any volunteers? I want to do that.
I need some more time. Can I be honest?
Cool. Somebody want How often are you talking, like? Not a lot of time.
Well, the next meeting will be once the bid once the bids come in, and we'll be just reviewing those, and right now Black River is kind of in a holding pattern, and I think they're gonna wanna come and present, I think, plans eventually here. So that won't be, you'll all be part of that. But as far as the Sugar House goes, the next one is just gonna be reviewing bids, so that shouldn't be overly. So Sarah, you know about sugaring?
So what time would these meetings be?
I don't exactly know. But we can make it fairly convenient because it's just gonna be reviewing the bids that do come in. So that's the 22nd. So it'd be shortly after that. I don't think it'd be more than an hour, and I'm assuming we could be very flexible.
I think it's gonna be more once the work is ongoing. When the last big project we did, we were doing meetings probably once a week, but they were scheduled. And that was in the height of construction. Don't anticipate they'll need to be that involved for the Sugar House. But when we get into the big project, we'll probably want that level of commitment.
I think some involvement with the Sugar House, because I think what we had talked about, where you're gonna need to get is to a place where you decide like what level of, what can you approve? Because we're gonna have to figure out change orders, because that's just a natural part of the building project. So the board is eventually gonna have to determine what level you can approve. It typically is more gonna be the next level, and then it might be more. into the
Well,
next level.
I think Burns by the first level. Is he not?
No, I think it's you. It's you.
Oh, boy.
So
I don't know.
you're.
Doing great.
Bill, if you make changes in the scope of the project, that's what a change order is.
Well, I understand that, but they're gonna come in. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So I do think, I don't think it's gonna be weekly for the Sugar House, but it would be great if there was a board member. I think that was connected to that, because there's gonna be some decisions that happen at that level that would be good if somebody was at, but definitely, and you don't have to commit to the larger project today. But as we get to that larger project, most construction projects have a board representative on that team. Just looking out for the board's interest.
Sarah would like to do it.
That might get you out of the
More,
room.
why not you, since you have to do the approval?
We're not favorite places in life.
Yeah, that's totally there. So Sarah, I don't think Sarah needs to come for bid openings. I think we're talking about like, if there's a big meeting where you've got to go do a site visit, you've got all your contractors.
Okay.
You know, this was something that Vern also talked with me about, that it makes sense to have members of the team that actually are part of this.
Okay.
Can that work for you?
Sure, I mean, as long as,
We'll be flexible.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Always like,
How's that thing?
yeah, if she can't make it, I'll make it.
Okay, does that work? Yes.
Okay.
On another note, I do have one question on the principal spotlights. If there are events that you put on here that the board members would be welcome to attend, if you wouldn't mind putting the times on there, I think that'd be helpful. Like I see some of the math nights, et cetera. That, you know, if it's okay for us to pop in and be present, if you put the time on there, that'd be great.
The math nights, I know because I made all the flyers, every math night is from 5 to 6:30.
Okay, thank you.
We have an exhibition of learning this Thursday night at 6 o'clock, 6 to 7, just to come in and see the products of our project-based learning. So if you're interested.
Yeah, say that one more time, let me get it on here.
I think, did I put the time? I think I put the time.
Oh, okay, then if you put it, that's
Okay.
great. Yeah, I tried to mark some of them down, but some of them I didn't see.
This,
Like the expo.
This
learning.
Thursday.
Yeah, so we're doing our very first, and we talked about having more audience members in June and perhaps having an evening event in June. I think folks aren't feeling quite ready to bring the public in because we don't know, what the potential snafus might be, but we are definitely gonna open it in June.
Certainly as a parent and board member, you could show up, right? I mean, our parents.
We're not
gonna
gonna turn you away.
this
We didn't
is
invite
not-
people.
Okay.
This is
sorry.
really our pilot
This is
trial
the-
I thought
run.
you were
Like an
talking
internal
about,
one, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Okay.
I thought you were talking internal parents, not like outside community. I'm
Oh,
thinking that.
not yet.
Yeah,
Yeah, we really need to see how this one goes and tweaks we need to make, and then in June, hopefully we'll make a real, like, right now it's an internal celebration of learning, but hopefully it'll become a much bigger thing, more June and Richmond. With an evening, showcase kind of thing. Yeah.
got it. Yeah, and I was thinking more like, as a board member, just coming to see some of the things that are happening on our campuses. So if we're welcome to any of those things, the time would be awesome.
Anything else, Nate? Nope, thank you. Okay. All right, next is the Lou Gates field maintenance request. Can I get the principals out of here now, Lynn, or you don't really need to be here?
Unless, do you need principals for any part of the
No,
conversation
no.
or in the field?
Yeah, don't get on the list.
Just be really careful going home. I just got a text. It's terrible out.
There's the
Yeah.
wind already.
3 inches
I
and
had kids
past
texting me, I don't think I can go to school tomorrow, it's awful in Sheldon.
I just had a kid Facebook message. I said, I'm sitting next to the superintendent, she hasn't made a decision. But you should be safe.
I'll get that for you.
So it snowed. They do, Facebook message.
3 inches in the last hour.
Yeah, I've got people saying that too.
Is it okay if, I don't stay too
So what do I have to do? Is it gonna be-
I'll make sure, just,
You can lock it out.
Yeah.
Robert must know how to do it.
Oh, it's
Robert's still here?
There it is.
I know,
As long as.
Going around on that.
probably not.
Okay. All right, we'll try to shove as many lights off as we can.
Yeah. I'll get some of them.
Drive safe.
I gotta get something from.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Stay safe.
Drive carefully, everybody.
Thank you, Lord.
I know. We've been two pretty lengthy meetings together. I know.
Very fast, so I can scroll you right
That's
through.
right.
Okay. Well, you go first. You get your file. I'll text you what's inside. Yeah, it's really nice.
Okay, all right, so Shauna unfortunately couldn't be here. She emailed Lynn. And basically she says is, last year there was 400 players from Enosburg and I believe some Richford students on combined teams with Enosburg. After 5 p.m., we really must give time to the Little League for practice and games. The fields at Dairy Center are used for the major and minor league baseball and softball teams. Likely this year, you'll see 5 teams utilizing those fields. So to answer Sarah's question, yes, the fields would be available, but would need to be consolidated or coordinated for use. Field use coordination at this time would likely run through the Little League contract. They have a Google Calendar for that. So then she goes on to say.
So what I
So-
had to ask was
Yeah.
if it'd be available for Richford as well as Enosburg.
So I think just a point of clarification, so she's talking about major and minor are Little League. Those are not school specific, those are
Right.
rec sponsored teams. But what she's saying is those teams don't start their practices or games until 5-ish.
Ish.
So she believes that there will, after checking with the person who keeps the calendar on Google, that there might be some opportunities for either Richford or Enosburg to be able to use that field that they schedule with that person
Yeah, Google.
via,
Yeah, the Google.
Yeah.
Map, right.
Okay.
I did have a conversation with Lynn, and the money that is utilized for Richford doesn't go to the Little League. It goes to the town for use of the fields.
Okay.
Their Little League fields.
well, their high school, like that's a middle high school size field at Richford. It's down on the it's in the rec area, but those are used as high school fields, the big field and the softball field in the back.
Right.
And then they have the Little League field
Yeah.
on the right.
I think we're under the impression last time that we were actually given Little League money for those use of those fields, and that's not the case. That's right, it goes to town.
Okay. Where did she say that she was, they were looking for money?
Half of 5,000 to 2,500.
Ish, I can look that up specifically.
And this would go to Little League, not to.
No, it
No,
actually
go
would go to the Luke Gates
No.
Foundation.
Because they would do.
So
the
it's at the
maintenance.
Dairy Center. So what they're asking you to do is contribute to half of the annual field maintenance for those fields.
Right.
And so it is somewhere near $5,000. And what they're hoping is that the town will take half of the portion and that the school system will take half of the portion to maintain those fields.
I think it was 55. 15.
I think it was too. But I think Enosburg would pay half of that.
So still 25 plus, right?
And just as a reminder, historically, we have not been utilizing those fields.
Mass done,
I
yeah.
think the only time I've seen those teams, I thought was with Little League. So this is something.
I'm assuming she's thinking because of field space that high school kids would be good to be able to utilize that, so. That's what I'm thinking, right? For scheduling reasons,
Well, I think
middle
I
school,
think-
high school.
what the original conversation was related to is that the Little League feeds into the middle and high school programs, and you've got.
Yeah.
I think, what was the data? She had 100 and 400.
It's a lot of kids
Yeah.
that do Little League. I mean, it's huge.
Right,
So you probably know.
but I don't believe, there hasn't been a request to them to use the field, but what they're saying is they could offer some access to the field for middle or high school teams, so that if they were sitting around here waiting for a game to be done, they might be able to have a practice that fits on the schedule. There's only one field, I think, that they could use for it. And she did say in that letter that they received the grant that they had asked for that had it was for the batting cage. So there will be, to her point, you can have a legitimate practice.
Anything else? My suggestion would be the $1,500, but only for this year, and then we look at it next year, see how much we're actually utilizing that.
Couldn't you like talk to coaches and the athletic director as far as like seeing how much of there is a need? Or is it just,
We asked Matt last time.
I was just curious, like,
Yeah,
if they're, how, like, are they short fields? Is that?
I mean, it's always,
Just in case, right?
it's always challenging
Yeah.
to try to get
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
everybody
yeah.
there. I think that they move themselves around and
Yeah.
try to figure it out. I mean, I've
Yeah.
had kids that have gone through here, so sometimes when there's a baseball game happening, down at the boys field, the JV or the middle school might do some sort of practice over on the soccer
Okay.
area. And I do think sometimes they go up by the fire station
Oh, wow.
as well. So it's just because the number of teams, so I think that this is mutually beneficial is what Shauna's proposal is that this could be an option for middle and high school teams. Whether or not they will use it or not, we don't know. But I think to your point, more what you're saying is let's
Match what we're doing Richford.
match what you're doing in
Taking
Richmond.
a look at it next year. We'll do it for 1 year.
And so in Richford, is it a similar situation where the schools are really not using the fields and it's more of a sort of a donation to Little League?
No,
No.
that's the only fields we have.
Richford.
So Richford is using
Yeah.
the field,
Yeah.
so that. I
So
mean,
it's
I think
actually the
that's
school's
difference.
fields, like
Right.
those are,
You're talking about the one like down in the, by the playground, right?
Yeah, the
Baseball, yeah,
And
softball.
Little
the
League,
town owns them.
Little League usually, doesn't start until
After,
Like-
right?
pretty much after.
Yeah.
I know that. Yeah, and most of the time they're using, the field that's across from the softball field.
Yeah.
If there were practice games at the same time.
So in Richford, they don't have a school field that they
Right.
maintain and pay for, but the town has that space for both of the softball and baseball field, and so they pay the $1,500 for use of that.
Yeah.
But this fee that she's talking about is the use of it, but the grooming of it, the setting up of it, the
It's
whole,
splitting the annual maintenance of the field.
yeah.
But I think it's kind of a very different situation than
Yeah.
Richford. This is apples and oranges. And so historically, do we have we in the past helped to fund, organizations that are offering services to the kids? Because I mean, I think that's what this kind of falls under the umbrella of, and so we would be setting a precedent there.
You have not, you have, your funding has been targeted towards school-sponsored athletics. I do think, and Morgan, you're gonna have to help me with this, because I think it was pre-me or early, during my time as a superintendent, but I do think there had been some agreement, I think there was some payment towards that field that existed when it was the Enosburg Town School District. I have a vague recollection, but I don't know any details.
Yeah, predated me, or it was a one-off sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it was, but we don't contribute to youth athletics other than the school athletics in any of our communities.
Yeah. So that would be my hesitation.
Well, this would be for kind of the same situation where it'd be for the use of the fields if we needed them.
We could use them.
Right.
Mhm.
Which I'm anticipating she's thinking that she will.
Yeah.
Or she wouldn't have, you know.
Yeah.
Midfield space is needed. I'm just not so sure, but I just was thinking that if Richard was in the same boat, that they'd have the flexibility of using it too, for all, you know, that sort of thing. I think maybe you're right about maybe not giving the whole bit,
No,
give it a
right.
certain
Yeah,
amount
and then we look at it in a year.
and see exactly how much it was utilized.
Yeah. Okay.
So what's the amount that you want me to tell her?
Match Richford's, I think. What do you think?
Yeah.
And then,
Willing to, yeah.
but only for 1 year.
So I think that
Look at it.
request was like an annual
It
request.
it was, it
You're
seems like it was.
like a test year to see like,
Mhm.
so I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're not wanting to make the contribution to the field if it's specific to Little League.
Right.
But if it is something that the school ends up using, you would be interested, once you get the data from this year, to come back and revisit this same time next year to see if this is something the board wants to continue to. Is that right?
Exactly.
And if we are using it, maybe increase that depending.
Right. Take a look at it. Make sure.
That'd be a motion, right?
I don't think so. Just a direction is
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Do you think it needs one? Do you want to move to my executive
Yep.
session?
Take a motion to go into executive.
I'll make a motion.
Sarah made a motion. Elijah?
Sure.
Adam and I. Okay, we're in executive.
Interest rate
Yep.
discount.
Go on. So, we're still on record.
It's gonna be very brief.
Oh, I'm sorry. I always forget. Usually nothing's on my side. This meeting is.
Okay, we're out of executive. Okay, so I will entertain a motion to, direct the chair to sign a letter
A
for
side letter.
the, a side letter for the, early sign-on bonus for teachers.
I'll make the motion.
Who's made the motion? Elijah?
Aye.
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
I'm an aye.
What do we have for you?
Okay. Any other board business? Then I'll entertain a motion to dismiss.
Adjourn. I'll make the motion.
Sarah made the motion. Elijah?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm an aye.
Thanks, everybody.